So, is Floromedic, do you mean any books you recommend for getting into med school or when you're in medical school? So I'm guessing that it's Floromedic, you're a medic right now. And so if so, let's go through that. Let me know. So yeah, as I said, I'm a final year medical student at UCL. I've been part of a few outreach programs for medical schools, for medical school to get into med school in general, including something called the Target Medicine Program, which is UCL's official one. So I've had experience mentoring students trying to get in for the last 6 years. I've also been part of the UCL interview panel for the last 2 years. So I have a pretty good idea of what type of candidate medical schools in general look forward to. So these are things that I can help you guys with if you guys ask for it, which is great. So when you are in med school, I just got my offers thanks to you guys. Hey, it's Floromedic. I'm super happy to hear that. Congratulations on your offer. And hey, which med school are you going to? Is my question for you. And yeah, so first off, I think last week we answered one of the questions being, what should you do in preparation for med school? Like, should you be revising over the summer or anything like that? My advice and most medics' advice are, don't worry about it. Start worrying when you're in med school during the term time. That's when they want you to be studying and not overburden yourself from early on. Otherwise, you'll risk burnout. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. Second thing I'd like to say is, in terms of buying books for med school, I didn't actually buy many books at all. One of the great things about med school is that you can hopefully borrow books from the library that you have for the university library, or you can borrow books from like organizations that you end up being part of, like the BMA or the Royal Colleges, and you can get those books for free by borrowing them. You can also get loads of PDF copies online. People pass down PDF copies on like Google Docs and drives and stuff like that from elder years. And that's a great way to access it. So one of the things I was really worried about before med school was that, oh my God, like some of these textbooks that if you look at it, they'll cost like 200 quid on like Amazon, or like 60 quid for like, for example, the Grey's Anatomy textbook or something like that. And I was really worried that how much of my student loan will I have to end up spending on books and stuff. It turns out I didn't spend anything really at all. I just invested the money in a laptop and then used PDF copies that were free off the internet for most of these things. So that's my little contingency that I'd say. Each medical school gives you guys like required reading, resources they'd recommend, because each curriculum is slightly tailored towards the med school. Like we all finish our MBBS with the same amount of content, but we just taught it in different ways. So those are a few things. And to finish your to answer your question, so it's Medic said that she's going to Lincoln. He or she going to Lincoln med school. So that's amazing. So well done. Super happy for you. You're going to be a doctor. That's amazing. So yeah. So one of the things that I'd like to say in terms of resources, I bought the Grey's Anatomy textbook because I realized that I use the PDF a lot, and I just wanted the textbook at least for myself in the future, or like just to have on my bookshelf. And I do have it on me right now. It's around the corner. I also got a few OSCE books when I got in, so like something called like OSCE Stop book. But these are things that I think elder years will give you recommendations for what's useful in their course or not. The other things that I'd say is that some people buy revision like anatomy flashcards. The Oxford Clinical Handbook is something really relevant for clinical years, but obviously you're going into preclinical years, so you won't need that from the beginning, hopefully. And there's like other anatomy textbooks and physiology textbooks that are niche. On top of all of this, I'll be honest with you, question banks really help. I think question banks that I know of and people have used include like PassMed, PassTest, QuesMed, I think BiteMed. Like all these like like notes and like question banks people use. Osmosis have amazing videos on YouTube that I'd recommend, and they actually have like an online program where you can buy their notes from like off the website, like if you subscribe to them or something. There's loads and loads and loads of content here that I'm throwing at you. These are things that I think you'll start working out when you get through med school. And don't worry about if you don't have the right thing at the beginning. You'll start learning about it as you go along. Floromedic, it's a long answer to your question. I hope that's given you some insight rather than a full-out answer. Apologies. And Amazing. Another aspiring medic goes, they've got an offer from Cardiff. And that is amazing news. Yeah, this is the time of year that we hear about great news regarding applications. I'm really proud of you, and thanks for sharing that with us. I'm so happy. Amazing. You're going to be a doctor. Woohoo! Cardiff Med School, here you come. And Roshan just giving her congrats because she's about to be a med student as well, which is great stuff. But no, that's great. Yes, yes, yes. Well done, guys. Yes, amazing stuff. And it's Floromedic. I'm happy that I was able to answer your question to an extent. So yeah, in short, don't worry about what you need to do until you get into med school. Start talking to people in years above. A lot of the times, I didn't actually use the textbooks. I used myself in the preclinical years, especially. I used the lectures that we had, so the lecture notes and the lecture slides. And then the second thing that I used was I used notes from people in the years above that were passed down on Google Drives, and those worked as my textbook because they made notes off a textbook in the first place. So there wasn't really a need for me to go through A to Z of textbooks and like find out niche facts I didn't know about. So I used their notes as textbooks and either derived my own notes from them or answered questions based on that information. But as I said, there's a whole host of online resources out there. What do you guys think? When you guys are about to go to med school, would you rather be using online resources, question banks, and like tutorials, or would you rather be more traditional and use textbooks and like question papers and like stuff like that? Like, what would you guys prefer? And me saying this is quite interesting because I think in my UCL med school interview, they asked me like, how do you feel about online learning? Like, is that something you want to do? Are you comfortable with it? Obviously, for me, I was like year 13, like online learning wasn't really a thing, especially like 6, 7 years ago. It was just school stuff. But obviously, I was open to it, and lo and behold, at the last few years of my med school, medical teaching is a lot online. So that is yes, yes, yes. Roshan, we'll do that. We'll definitely do that today. That's one of the topic lists that we're going to be talking about today, Roshan. We'll hit on what about F1 stuff. Just for now, I'm going to go through a few questions that have come in, and then we'll address that in like next 10-15 minutes. So, any floral medic has asked about the books recommended for school, and I've answered that question to an extent. Today we'll be on until 7:15, by the way, guys, because we started a little bit later. So feel free to keep your questions coming in, and we'll have a good dialogue about. So today we'll have a good dialogue about life as a kind of final year medical student, what you guys should be aiming for like your time in medical school, and then what that means for F1. Because at the end of the day, you want to go into med school to become a medical student, right? But then when you're in medical school, you want to pass in order to become an F1, which is your first year of being a doctor. So things like shift as you go along your journey through medicine. Yes, another aspiring medic mentioned, I'd rather use online resources and question banks because I feel that the med school content needed is ever expanding. Yes, and I'd rather it be paperless. So that's a very good point. So in my first 2 years, I used notes that were like quite static. Things didn't change because basic physiology and science doesn't change that much. But in clinical years, you can't really use textbooks unless for like underlying information. I think it was more that for example, in order to find out what the best investigation is for like diagnosing heart failure, for example, that's something, or like the first line investigation or the first line management or the main management for it, or like the defining management for it. I think these are things that constantly evolve with clinical research. So I normally go into the NICE CKS website, NICE clinical something, I don't know what it stands for, sorry, NICE CKS website, and I get loads of information or updated guidelines on there, and that's how I form my notes or my knowledge in order to answer questions and use to practice in the next few years, hopefully. That's what all doctors use. You know, when people say, oh, I'm going to the GP and like my GP has a monitor up with like loads of information and they just keep like reading off it or something, like that's a lot of the times a lot of lay people do say that, and it's because all the new guidelines are on NICE CKS. And as when I was on GP placement and acting as a GP, that's what I was pulling up, the recent guidelines to double check. Like, I know what roughly you should have for a specific condition, but you also want to check and have the most updated guidelines with that. So I'm just so used to online learning now and read all my journal articles online. So I'd be happy to read books too, Roshan. I think that's really an advantage of being in higher education before your med school degree in itself. And it helps you transition quite easily from going from like, as opposed to going from like A levels where you've got loads of textbooks and like papers that aren't online and things like that. So that's a very good position that you're in. Yeah. Definitely. And I think a lot more med schools are giving iPads out, or people are getting iPads to use as well. So that means on the go, people are able to use like the internet to find out this information. So the nice CKS website is really good. Past Medicine have really good guidelines and information that's clinically relevant. I think the other one is called BMJ Best Practice, and patient.info, and like even the NHS.info website as well have really good information on loads of diseases and like content like that. So I think those are content that I tell you guys to have a look at when you're going through the next few years, especially in the clinical years. Good, good, good. Thanks, guys, for the questions. Keep them coming in. So the next question I have is from DSX. What is the difference between the October and September BMAT? There is not really any difference between the two. They are two different papers, right? Because obviously you don't want September people telling people in October what the paper's about. But yeah, so they're two different papers, but they're the same type of BMAT paper. The other difference is obviously the date of the September BMAT and the October BMAT. And the last thing is that I think Oxford University did not include the September BMAT sitting or didn't consider people who did the September BMAT sitting. And you're not allowed to retake the BMAT if you've done it in September and you want to change it to do it in October afterwards. You can't do that just because you're unhappy with your score. So that's something to bear in mind. From another perspective, I think a lot of the time people are like, oh, I want to get my BMAT out of the way early so I know what score I'm going to get so that I can then apply with all the information in front of me. That is what the reason is for people for applying like that. However, when this was a thing, the September and October BMAT, only like 10% of the people did the September BMAT. And of the reason why is because you're doing work experience, UK CAT, personal statement, prep, all of that all at the same time, especially in like August, September. So you can't simultaneously revise for BMAT and UCAT, and that's what a lot of people have realized. So after revising for your UCAT, you tend to start revising for the BMAT. So it naturally puts you to think about the October BMAT. Hopefully I've answered your question there with a little bit more insight. Nice. Another aspiring medic has asked, what kinds of part-time jobs would you recommend to med students? That's a very good question. The first thing that comes to my head is something called, I think each med school has a different, but we at UCL have a student ambassador program. And I think like all universities across the country have a variation of that. Some of them are called student ambassadors or like student champions or whatever. And what that means is that you work for the university to kind of promote them or like help them with their daily activities. And that's not like daily activities in terms of lectures. It's more like, for example, if a university hosts an event for academics or if they host an event for people in local schools, you'll be there as a facilitator. You'll be there giving out food. You'll be there giving presentations to tell them what the university is about. You'll be giving them campus tours. There's a whole host of things that I actually did as a student ambassador, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. Like, it added to my university experience, talking about my university experience to people who were external to it, whether that be parents, academics, work people, corporate people, or like students that were like me a couple of years back. Like, I really enjoyed it. There's a lot of different work out there, and it's quite ad hoc, so it was like a 0-hour contract. So I chose shifts when I wanted to go and kind of do those shifts and earn some money. So like in 1 month I worked, for example, like for like 2 weeks in a month, and that was because it was my summer holiday period, and so I was like, let me do something with that. And in other months I didn't work for it at all, so it was really good for me to get that type of income at the right time. I also ran was part of a team that ran summer schools for medical applicants who like widening participation medical applicants. So I ran those summer schools, and obviously you got paid for work like that. I created my own summer school through a different organization affiliated to UCL, and I obviously got paid for that. There's just like loads of things that I really enjoyed that. But that was from my experience. Before that, over the summer, I did work part-time at like a supermarket. Those were like pretty good hours and like decent pay. And if you work part-time, it's definitely feasible on the weekends or maybe evening shifts. And I've had friends do it. I've had other friends work for startup companies after a couple of years within the degree because they had a CV that they built towards that. And then they got some jobs and got good amounts of money from those startups. And they really enjoyed the experience as well. It's a different experience working for companies like that. So that's something to look forward to. And yeah, so part-time jobs, a lot of people, student unions, the cafes, like stuff like that, like normal jobs that you could have, people do. And I think the bulk of medical students that I know, or like students in general, actually do tutoring through online platforms, especially in this time. And that type of tutoring, whether that be through UCAT or BMAT tutoring, or whether that be biology, chemistry, or like whatever GCSEs you did tutoring, people do credit that. And having like being a medical student at university also adds to your tagline for people to come to you for tutoring. And I think a lot of my friends made money by doing that. And they really enjoyed it because they were able to develop their teaching skills and their experience as well through that job. So it's nice to have a part-time job. It adds to your CV, your resume, your skills. I think it makes you an all-round doctor when you do have a part-time job. And that doesn't even include all obviously the perks of actually getting paid and hopefully helping to sustain your living as well through med school, because it's definitely a 5 to 6 year degree, which is quite long. I thought personally myself that I wouldn't be able to balance a part-time job with my degree. So in my first year, I didn't take up a part-time job. However, after that, I a few friends were doing it, and so I gave it a go, and I kind of increased my hours as I went through med school because I was more able to handle it as I was able to adapt. But well, one thing that I'd say is definitely your summers and your holidays. Like your summer holiday is like 4 months long. You can not only get a part-time job, you can get a full-time job during that period. And I know a lot of people that took full-time jobs up as like seasonal employment. So they came back for 4 months of the summer they had off, or they came back for the 4 weeks of Christmas or the 4 weeks of Easter that they had off. In the summer holiday, you don't have actually work to do, whilst in the other holiday periods you might. So it's a good balance. But hopefully I've given you guys some thoughts. Have any of you guys had part-time jobs before? What have you guys done? Have you enjoyed it? Yeah, drop it below if you have or not. Mo, I go to UCL Med School. I'm a final year medical student there. And Abmed has asked about anesthesia residency for an IMG in the UK. I'm sorry, Abmed, I'm not on that level to know about that yet. We help out with year 12 applications for med school. Incredibly helpful. You're very welcome as paramedic. Basically, there's opportunities out there for you. I think the easiest one at first is tutoring. And then when you go to the university, definitely before you go, look out for scholarships, for bursaries that you can apply for, because that's a different sort of income for you to come in as well. And obviously look out for the student ambassadors or shifts or like workplace stuff that you can do, and like getting activities like that. One thing I'd like to say as well on this is that actually paid jobs are really important, like especially for a student who needs it, right? And I needed it to sustain my living for a few years of med school as well. And what was interesting was that I got involved with Target Medicine, which is a volunteer-based, free, and I didn't get paid for my time, like kind of activity to help kids get into med school in year 12 and 13. And then from that, I actually gained loads of experience and skills, and was then able to go to other jobs like being a student ambassador. And one of the reasons why I got onto that student ambassador scheme is because I did that Target Medicine scheme, and I already knew about how to work with people who are under 18. I knew how to approach that type of like university life and like perspective. And the other thing that I'd say is that from that Target Medicine volunteering program that I did for 2 years came the opportunity to be involved in the summer school, which was actually paid. So yeah, so that was the thing that I'd like to say there. Sorry, yeah, there we go. Cool. And nice. Yes, Roshan has a good point here about conflicted about private tuition, and money is good, but strongly about widening participation. I think it works two ways. So I think I was fine. I never tutored, but I also thought about it like if I tutored maths and English and sciences, like and the demand is there, and if I didn't do it, someone else would do it. I'd be happy to do it because it was kind of like academia in general, and it's more like obviously if they're not getting enough help from their teachers, then fine. Like maybe I can help them in this essence, and obviously the family or the kid is parting with their money, so obviously it's a marketplace. I think you could apply the same principles to tutoring for like medical school applications, whether that be UCAT, BMAT, personal statement, or interview tutoring. However, I think they have different connotations because actually getting into med school in the first place is difficult, and there's a lot of inequity or like inequalities with that. And I think that's when I thought to myself that I didn't want to kind of reinforce those like narratives, and so that's why I didn't tutor for UCAT or BMAT. Also because I did not enjoy learning UCAT or BMAT, so I did not want to relearn it to reteach it. But yeah, that's another one. Hello, Annie. Hello, how you doing? You're right. Give us a little wave. Annie's a 50 med student at UCL. Thanks for joining us, and a friend of ours at Medmentor. Yes, there's a lot of demand. I suppose there are ways then to give back to other areas as well and do things for free for certain groups. Yes, and that's something that I think is definitely a personal approach, and something that is always conflicting. And one of the reasons why we set up Medmentor, yeah, just like yeah, that's why we set up Medmentor. But obviously, to keep something like this, an organization like this up and running, there are costs to it. They need to source some income, and you don't necessarily have to go by charging clients. You can get it through other ways, whether that be sponsorships or donations or other things. So these are things to think about in the future. Yeah, worst experience of my life, worse than interviews. And I agree with a lot of what you just said. Wait until you hit med school and some of the exams that get to you. But there's worse exams than UCAT apparently. How would you suggest structuring your personal statement? Kiana has asked that question. That's a very good question, Kiana. I don't think you're on at the moment, but I will answer it and hopefully you look at this back. So the personal statement itself is it's not structured like most other statements for university. It's that you want to integrate your work experiences, any jobs that you've done, anything that you've read about medicine, and like and seen things that you've read in news articles and stuff like that. And you want to integrate that into a full-on personal statement, and it's more about what you've learned from all those experiences and your reflections, and that's how you build those paragraphs with specific themes. Generally, you start off with like, why do you want to do medicine in your first line / paragraph? And that might be because of a personal experience / work experience and things that link to each other. At the end, you want to conclude with like what extracurricular activities that you do, and all the other paragraphs in the middle, which is like 2 or 3 paragraphs in the middle, all are talking about kind of income that you've had in the medical field and kind of integrating it together to then reflect on. So there's no specific structure in that sense, but it's different to other university personal statement structures. It's very much more content and experience centered. Cool. I hope I've answered that question. Roshan, I've got your question in the back of my mind. We'll be answering it in the next 5-10 minutes, just getting through a few more. So another aspiring medic asks, are there any items you think are really useful to bring to accommodation that aren't obvious? Oh, that's a really, really good question. I'm trying to think. I think I have now made a Notion page for my accommodation, like moving in and out, and what do I need to take in or replace and stuff. So what I'd say is definitely make like a list of things that you need to move in for, and kind of envision what your uni room might look like. But yeah, nothing off the top of my head where that was like really useful to bring to accommodation, because some accommodations are really bare, and some, like for example, in some accommodations you might need to get a kettle. Whilst the accommodations I've been in, I've never needed a kettle, so that's been fine. One thing I'd recommend is actually buying a Hoover. Seems very niche and very weird to say that, but it turns out that any accommodation generally doesn't have a Dyson Hoover. They generally have like a £10, £20 very dead Hoover that's like 50 years old that doesn't work. So I'd say buy a Hoover. I'd say buy like a washing rack, because you need to dry your clothes in a way where you don't need to just use one little heater if you want to do dry cleaning. And apart from that, yeah, those are the main things, and obviously the basics for the kitchen. I think there's a lot of things in the kitchen that you need, and you start and then you start, yeah, you've got a long list. I'll be honest with you, I'm sure you're clever enough to realize what you need and don't need, and I think I'm more like the one that's panicked last minute when I've got there, like, oh my god, what do I need? I think this year when I moved in, so in my first year accommodation, like in my room, there was really bare bones that I did not make any effort. This year I got a few posters for it, like a world map. I added LED lights, fairy lights, like I jazzed it up. I made it look nice. Yeah, so that was good. Another thing I'd say is get a travel bag. So when you move, or like a duffel bag, when you move from your house to like, and a big one, so that when you move from like one place to another, you got plenty of things to put in, or just use a small suitcase, especially for weekend trips. And yeah, that's that. Those are the little things that I like to say. Hopefully that's helped. That's a nice little question. It's thrown me back to my first year days. Good. I think a lot of the times when you do live out, the issue becomes that you need to buy two of many things, especially like you need one thing in your home, and you need one thing where you're living out. So expenses do rack up a little bit because of that, and I didn't like that. You might need a lamp in your room. I really don't like the top like lamp or top like lights in most uni accommodation, because they're just hella bright and just pure white light. So I like dimmer lights, and I'd recommend getting like a little lamp or something like that. Can you give any advice? Bella has asked, can you give any advice on how to reflect on work experience or volunteering? Anything? Okay, can you advise on how to reflect on work experience? Anything interviews or medical schools look out for? I think the reflecting on your work experience of volunteering, I think on personal statements is very much more tick box, that like the university admissions tutor wants to see that you did volunteering here and whatever that title is, and then reflect on that so that it looks like you've actually been there and have taken something away. So it could be like a simple reflection that links to another experience or book or another reflection or insight. So I think a lot of the time you need to start linking your reflections up. Not saying like, oh, I've reflected on this, therefore that. More like you reflect on it, and then your next point has to kind of like add to that reflection a little bit, and that would be really good in a personal statement. I looked at it like a flow diagram approach when I approached the personal statement. And then when it came to work in like I think in an interview is reflecting on a work experience or volunteering. A lot of the time, it's not like, oh, tell me about a work experience you've done. It's more very much more specific. So tell me about a work experience. Tell me about a time where you helped someone and it was a challenging time, for example. And that's when you then bring in your, oh, so when I volunteered as part of my school's like prom committee, for example, or like charity lead, I was part of a team. It was difficult because we had an issue with stocks after for a bake sale, and the way we overcame it was by doing this. At the end of it, I realized that actually by delegating tasks and acting within a team and as a leader, we were able to kind of make the most of a difficult situation. So it's kind of using those type of like anecdotal evidences and reflecting on it with keywords that they'd like to see in a medical interview. That's what I'd like to say. You need to be very specific with your reflections, and you need it to apply with buzzwords that apply to the medical field, so people can see what you're doing with it or where you're going with it. And that's why reflections are key. And I'd say reflect. That's the main thing that we'd say to anyone applying for med school? Good. I hope I've answered your question there to an extent. If not, drop another question as a follow-up. I'm happy to answer it. Cool. Yasmin asked, if I don't get into med school this year, would you recommend taking a gap year and reapplying or doing biomedical sciences? So that's a very good question. I think a lot of people do end up in that scenario. I know loads of friends that did. And I know quite a lot of friends that took a gap year. I know a lot of friends that did biomedicine as a degree. Now, it depends on yourself and if you think you'd enjoy a biomedicine degree. If you think that you're scientific and you want something to learn scientific and you want to go to university and you've got a good offer, then go for it. And maybe you can do postgraduate medicine, or you can do like those transition into med school careers. I think Roshan is someone who has done a degree before. Maybe she has a little bit of insight. I think one of the drawbacks to applying for medicine as a postgrad is that it is more competitive. However, you do have more experience and do know more if medicine is for you and if you're more determined or not, and can rack up the experiences for your personal statement and interview, and you develop as a person. But also on the other side is that you do have more debt because obviously you'll be at uni for all that time. It's a longer period of time until you become a doctor, and in a postgrad degree, you'd tend to have to pay from your own pocket upfront costs for the degree itself. So a lot of the time, the deterring factor for many students is that if I do a biomed degree and want to still do medicine, I have to then pay 9K a year out of my pocket for my medicine degree, and student finance doesn't cover that. And I think that's something for you to bear in mind. It's not impossible. A lot of people do part-time jobs or like work in the summers or like stuff like that to try and kind of fund that, but that's something to think about. I think it's a very difficult decision to make. And something that I would say, don't ever think about it and speak to people around you and who have done it before. Taking a gap year, I honestly thought is, I think a gap year is a good idea if you haven't got into med school the first time, but you got to trust that, number one, that your grades, so let's say if you've got 3As or A star AA and you haven't got a med school offer, but you got those grades, I think it's definitely worth taking that gap year because you have those solid grades to apply to med school with during your gap year, and you could get an offer. And if that's not the case, then you can go to a different university or a course in that time. The other thing that I'd like to say is that with taking a gap year, and if you, for example, you're taking a gap year because you didn't get a med school offer, but also because you didn't get the grades that you wanted, if you're like 1 or 2 grades off like an A or A star, then that's fine. You believe that you think that you're gonna get a better grade and you're gonna get the 3As or A star A that you need to med school, and you think you're capable to, then definitely take that gap year and don't sell yourself short. Like, at least take that opportunity, take that year. It's worth it. However, if you aren't someone who's that great at science, for example, for these like A levels that you need to be, and you're getting like C's and D's, and it's not like it'd be quite almost like a miracle for you to get an A or A star. You have to be realistic to yourself and say, like, do I think I'll be able to get A star AA in my next year sitting, or AAA, and get into med school? Because if not, then it doesn't matter. Even if you get an offer, you won't get in unless you apply for different foundation programs. Because I've seen the latter happen. So I've seen people who didn't get 3As for A level, and then their academic record was okay, but it wasn't like of an A or A star student, and then they took a gap year and they got the same grades, or they fell short of the 3As, and therefore they went to university somewhere else after taking a gap year. Like, at the end of the day, at least they tried, they took the extra year, they proved to themselves, like, could I do it or not? And so they wouldn't regret it. But that's something for you to bear in mind. Last thing I'd like to say on this is that 1 year in your 1 year gap year is not long at all. I would encourage you to take it if you want to, and your career is going to be like, I don't know how long now, 50, 60 years until you retire. 1 year in the grand scheme of things is nothing. A lot of your friends and a lot of people in my generation are like, oh my God, all my friends are going to uni. I need to go to uni as well. So I'm not going to take this gap year. I'm going to rush into a degree that I'm not sure about, or like during clearing, and just because I need to get into a uni and just do what society tells me to do. And I think those are those are decisions that aren't well thought of, and that's something for you to kind of bear in the back of your head. I hopefully have helped answer that question. I know a few of the comments came in as well below, so I'm just going to read through them as well. But that's good. Medical school council have documents that tell you key attributes of a doctor, Roshan. You don't need to have all of those attributes, but you can pull some of them and build from your own experience. That's an idea. Thanks, Roshan. Always planned on going into medicine, but as a graduate, there are much fewer places on the graduate entry universities. That's very true. I don't want to be that person, but my most recent post about gap years and hopefully, oh, amazing! Another aspiring medic who's in a gap year has themselves. So be hopeful in some way. Hopefully, thank you so much for that. Another aspiring medic, really appreciate that. And the graduate course I have a place for only at 25 places, so it's highly competitive compared to undergrad, but it's still doable. I don't want to put you off. Having a degree before med school means that you have better research skills, more life experience, which is fantastic. So if there are any courses you feel like you'd enjoy, then I would go for it. Roshan, with great advice here. I absolutely love to see it. Yasmin, thank you for that question. That was a very good question. And good luck with what your decisions end up being. I know plenty of mentees that I've had that have taken gap years and gotten into med school the year after, and that's been good for them, and they've really enjoyed that gap year as well, so I wouldn't discourage it. I think if you're completely set on medicine and you have the right grades or close enough to the right grades, taking gap year is one of the best things you can do. I agree. Honestly though, 1 year is nothing. Jess Olo is a great one to check out. She had a gap year and is in King's now. So she has a lot of info and resources on her site for gap year applications. Oh, wow. Yes, Jess Olo is brilliant. I think she's a King's medic. She's a supporter of Medmentor and has shouted us out a few times. So thank you very much, Jess. But she's brilliant. She's got really good resources on her website about gap years too. So thank you for the reminder, Roshan. I will check those out myself as well, because I do get loads of questions about gap years. And it's a tricky situation that a lot of people are in. Eve has asked, can I get a reduced grade offer if I do an EPQ? The answer to that is no, they don't generally. If some universities do, I check with them by calling the admissions department to ask. In general, no. It's one of them. She's really good. Yeah, it says one of the usernames. Okay, cool. I think we've tied up a few of the questions that have come in. Keep them coming in, guys. I think what I'm going to do now is answer something that we were going to talk about today. And that was about kind of medical school. So, and building up to F1 and final year medical school. So Roshan asked, would it be possible to chat about your experience in final year and the application process for F1? So let me talk to you guys about the application process for FY1, and I'll talk to you about my kind of final year and what I've been doing. So final year was my 6th year of university, or 5th year for most medical schools without an IBSE imposed on them. So in that final year, I went in after I finished. So first year and second year were 2 preclinical years for me, so it was all science-based. Third year was BSc. Fourth year was core clinical medicine. So, and I say that because that core clinical medicine comes back to me in final year for me to be tested on. So that's stuff like cardiology, respiratory, gastro. Like when I say core, I mean like the body's core, quite generally. Rheumatology, all of that kind of like medicine stuff, and medicine and surgery that are like core principles. That's what I learned in 4th year. And what happens in final year is you actually get tested on a lot more 4th year, like, so content that is specific to your core medicine, but in a final year standard, ready for you to be an F1. So it's a little bit more difficult and a higher standard is required. My 5th year out of my 6 years was my specialties year. So that's the exams that I did last year. Those were pediatrics, psychiatry, obs and gynae. People have trauma orthopedics in that, other things like that. The specialties are very difficult because they're very much more post-grad training orientated. So when I mean post-grad, I mean like post-MBBS. When you go into a specialties degree, like specialties program, you have to learn this information quite well to pass those exams, to go through the training program. And so that year, 5th year out of 6th year for me was very tricky because the content is very much, it's not dumbed down for you. It's very much of a high level for those who are almost post MBBS, but you're being taught it to pass your MBBS. It's quite interesting. So then when I got to final year, it's going back to core medicine. So we went on to 4 specialties that, so one was geriatrics, so medicine for elderly people. One was medicine, just medicine as a block, so like cardio, rest, gastro. The other one was not gastro, sorry. The other one was surgery, and the other one was, I have forgotten the other one, GP. Sorry, I don't know why I've forgotten GP. And so those make up the basis of final year, and they tend to do that for most final years across the country as well. It's almost like a review of everything. So it's been quite nice knowing a lot more about what medicine is about and being able to kind of, and this is what the framing is for UCL final years, is like act like a F1, think like a F1, or like think like a F1, act like a F1. And so this year has been like medicine wise very much more about formulating diagnoses, making management plans, using my communication skills with good effect, with consultations with with patients, as if I'm a doctor myself. And so I had a lot more autonomy on ward rounds, on GP consultation, to do it myself with supervision from doctors that I'd report back to and check things through. So that's a really exciting thing about final year, and that's something I'd look forward to. I think the other part to final year is more the admin side, and the admin side. So sorry, I just wanted to kind of base what final year was about in that sense. In terms of actual applications, so my 2 years of medicine, 4th year and 5th year out of 6 years, those 4th year and 5th year accounted for, so 4th year accounted for 12.5% of my application. So at the end of your medicine degree, so let me explain this properly. So that at the end of your medicine degree, you've got to apply for training as a doctor in F1 or F2. In F1, and that training program, those are training programs that you apply to all across the country for specific jobs as well. And so let's say I want to stay in central London. I'd need to have a really competitive kind of point system behind me, because that's how they calculate how to kind of put me in like London, for example, or like a certain part of the country. If like, for example, one part of the country was more competitive to another. So the way you build those points up in your degrees, in your MBBS degree, is based on, so for example, 12.5% of my 4th year, so 12.5% of the application was my marks for 4th year, and my other 12.5% was like my marks for like 5th year. I think 12.5 to like 17.5%, something like that. And that wasn't based on my raw mark, that was based on where I came in the university, like in my, so if I came first decile or I came bottom decile, I got a specific range of points based on that. Obviously, the higher the decile, the better you did, the more points you got. The other points that I got, that you guys won't get now because this thing has been scrapped, / the UKFBO are looking into it, is points based on my BSc. So that was a degree that I did within it, and I think I got up to 5 points for that, and the other one was a few points for getting things published. And again, that's something the UKFBO have changed. I think they'll replace that with the SJT. Now, coming on to the SJT, turns out the whole of med school rests on this one exam where you thought the UCAT was bad. It gets worse. And the SJT is like the situational judgment component of the UCAT, but times that by 10 difficulty and like the stakes to it. Like it counts for like 50 something % of my medical school like points system application for F1, F2. And so it's really, I honestly, I think a lot of people think it's a random name generator, so that people who are the cleverest in the country don't end up in one hospital or something, but people get spread out. But I think it's not something that you can really revise for. It's more like practicing and clinical kind of, not applying any clinical knowledge, but just like principles that you learn on the situational judgment. As you guys have done it on UCAT, you guys kind of know what I'm talking about. So that's where that's where at the end of final year in like December, you sit this huge exam that lasts for like 2 hours 45 minutes, and you just hope for the best when you click those answers and hope that you get into a good hospital. And I know how stressful it is, because you don't really have much say on what's going on. I know people want to go to hospitals close to their house or like somewhere else completely, and people have personal reasons for it, so it's difficult. I've seen some of the questions and people on Twitter discussing the SJT, but honestly sounds horrendous. Yes, Roshan, is horrendous. Don't worry about it until you get to final year and you realize how horrendous it is. You can laugh about it all you like before and after, but when you're doing it, you're not laughing. But yeah, you just laugh and smile. So yeah, so that's the thing that I'd like to. So basically, SJT, your academic score based on your 2 clinical years, excluding your final year and excluding your preclinical years. So if you're in a 5-year degree, that'll be your 3rd year and your 4th year, I think. That goes towards your calculation of your points. One thing I'd like to say and caveat is that actually the UKFPO love changing things these days, apparently. And so if they're changing things, they might change things for your years in the future. So I definitely look into it and see if there's anything being changed as the years go by, because they might change things like next year before you've even applied even to med school. That's something to look at. Roshan, has that helped you to an extent? The other thing I'd like to say actually is, aside from the SJT, we do have another exam called the Prescribing Safety Exam Assessment. So that's something that we just have to pass. It's just pass or fail. Everyone does it all in across the country, and that's just to be able to prescribe medicine as a F1 and as a doctor. You need that award that isn't covered in your MBBS, and it's actually excluded from your MBBS, and it's done externally. Yeah, so that's another exam that you get in final year. The other, it's like a final year is very much like deadline heavy, so a few short bursts of madness every so often. You've got obviously mock exams, and then you've got finals, which is pass or fail. They don't count towards your application for F1, F2. They just count to make sure you're a safe doctor or not, which is quite refreshing to have as well. So yes, Roshan, the answer to that is yes and yes. So I got into EBH and deanery, which is Essex, Basildon, no, Essex, Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire. And that's something that, so you've got 20 deaneries across the whole UK. So you've got north. So for example, London is split into North Central and East. So North London hospitals, East London hospitals. You've got North West London. You've got South Thames, which is all the South London hospitals, and also all of south of England, which is mad, all the way down to the coast. And then you've got stuff in Trent, which is a different type of deanery. You've got Sussex, Scotland, which is a deanery by itself. You've got Wales as a deanery by itself. You've got Northern Ireland as a deanery by itself. You've got Northwest England, Northeast England. What I'd say is, if you're actually intrigued about that, Roshan, is I'd encourage you to go to Medley. I think that's what it's called. I don't know if that's Medley, which is no, maybe not Medley. I will come up with what it's called. I'm just going to Google in a bit. So basically, they have foundation programs. They tell you about where to get into and where you can go into it and stuff like that. So I think it was called Medley, but I'll double check. Entire countries as one deanery, yes. So basically, it's not that bad, Roshan, because after you've decided and ranked what happens is your SJT score and your scores from med school gets combined, and you then get ranked from across with all the students in your year, in final year, across the country, from number 1s to the 5,000 student. You just get your score, and from that, they then just put you into what you preferred to go into. So let's say I put down EBH as first and I put Wales as second. If my grade wasn't good enough to get into the EBH area cutoff score because other people had put it first, and they had higher scores than me and it was all full up, then I'd go to my second option, which would be Wales, because or my third if Wales was full up, or my fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh. That's how it works. I'll be honest with you, Roshan, when you get into med school, you realize that a lot of the reason why people are competitive is because of the way this system works. Is basically you're up against everyone across the country as a medical student, as well as everyone in your year group, because in order to get higher points, you need to get a higher decile in your year group. So for example, and you could be in a year group in a university that's super clever, right? And so super clever and they're really good at medicine, you could come 10th decile. But if you are another university where that year group, not everyone was super clever, right? You could have been first decile. You've actually been robbed of like 10 points, basically. And that 10 points is a huge difference. And I think that's where competition comes in with medicine. And yes, it's called Mesli.com. Sorry, I don't know why I was thinking about Mendeley, which was something else. Mesli.com. Thank you for that. And those Mesli.com kind of like breaks down your deaneries and stuff like that. So what I was saying, Roshan, about big deaneries like Scotland, Wales, South Thames, they cover a lot of hospitals and areas. After you get your deanery and get into your position, so let's say if I got into Scotland, I would then, in these next 2 weeks, I would then say which part of Scotland or like which part or area within that huge deanery that I really want to go for, and I would put that down as my preference. And then from that, I would then rank the hospitals that I want to go to and the jobs, which is the rotations that they have with them alongside them as well. I think that's a lot of tertiary information, that stuff you don't really need to worry about, but it does get broken down if you're in a big deanery. When you're in a small deanery, you don't have to have it broken down. You just rank your one to like whatever number of jobs with whichever hospitals that you want to apply to. Yeah, thank you for reminding me, because it turns out I've forgotten that I need to rank my hospitals and my jobs, so I'm going to do that. It's quite an exciting time, I'll be honest with you, because you're trying to decide kind of what you're going to do for the next 2 years of your life. After being 6 years in med school, I think it's very refreshing to have some change. Obviously, every year is different. You have BSc years and stuff, but it's like an era of your life that changes. So it's something definitely to look forward to. I think a lot of the times I looked forward to it because you also had graduation and elective. So final year is super fun. And finals is like, when you get into med school, you realize it's harder to fail than to pass. Like probably less than 1% of that. I don't really know the numbers, but like from my knowledge, in my year group at UCL, probably less than 1% of medical students dropped out in my year group or something like that. Like it's quite uncommon for them to drop out or kind of fail altogether. Obviously, by final year, you kind of know how it works. You enjoy it. You do group provision. I remember seeing a lot of Ali Abdal's vlogs when I was kind of in my third year. When he was starting off, he was doing vlogs about like life as a final year medical student. Just like stuff that he was on placement, he was doing exams, he was just like with friends. And I'll be honest with you, like looking back on it now, like that is generally how life kind of is and was, especially for final year. So if you look at Ali Abdal's final year vlogs, you'll enjoy them, and that will give you a good idea of how life as a final year is. I probably would have done the same if anyone wanted to see it, but oh well, final year has gone by really fast. Thank you, Roshan. Yes, super exciting. Do you have any other questions regarding? I think the next part of your question, I think that I wanted to talk to you guys about is kind of carrying things on that you've been. So another aspiring medic, Roshan, you guys are here. Like you guys have done a lot to get into med school, and what I'd like to say to you is actually carry that on. Like carry on doing what you enjoy, what you like, things outside of medicine or related to it that isn't purely science or like research based, not science like academia work. The reason why I'd say that is because I think in order to build a good personal statement and be an all-round student for an interview, you tend to become that all-round student when you're doing these activities, because you have to enjoy them to do it in order to get into med school, to be honest. And so a lot of medical students, you'll realize, inherently want to do a lot more than just medicine, by just more than like studying, because what they've done is study and do other things alongside it. And I think that's what I realized when I got into med school. Most of my year groups and years above, there was definitely a culture, especially at my uni, where we were part of societies like cultural, music, or like medicine based. Like we were part of loads of societies. We took up big positions, like being a president, a treasurer, a vice president, events rep, all of that. And it's because as medics, we like to get involved and take some responsibility and do kind of do outside work and kind of like have a different release of energy rather than medicine itself. I think that's something that's a skill that we kind of build on through the application process that actually you use throughout your med school degree as well, with all these extracurriculars. And I think you use that even more so when you're a doctor, because you need to be an all-round person to be able to relate to people who aren't going to be doctors. That your patient isn't going to be a medic or a doctor. So if the only way you can think is like a medic or a doctor, you're going to really struggle to connect to your patients. So that's why I really encourage people to take those part-time jobs or take extracurricular activities, get involved with just things outside of medicine to kind of get that insight. So it really is one of those things that I'd encourage you guys to, yeah, so that's why it's one of those things that I'd encourage you guys to think about and actually like be happy that you guys have gone through a competitive application process, because it's made you kind of the person you are in terms of how much energy you have for other things. Yes, so yes, of course, another aspiring medic taking a gap year. I think people who take gap years really excel in their first and second year of uni. Like they kind of are more refreshed. They've had more insight. They've had time to mature a little bit. They know about like what they don't and don't do. Like they've discovered themselves a little bit more. First year is a really difficult time for most people, especially if you just come from like year 13. I definitely found it difficult. Like it was just a lot. Like you just take on a lot of responsibility really quickly. So things are blessings in disguise, I think, a lot of the time, which is good to see. You're very welcome, Roshan. I always wondered about the really competitive nature, but it certainly makes sense. Doesn't make it right, but good to get the insight and be able to create those building blocks in earlier. Yeah, so Roshan, in my point of view, right, I'll be honest with you, I had no idea that there was some application. Like, I remember someone saying at some point, oh yeah, you get ranked from 1 to whatever. I'll be like, all right, fine. I'll worry about it when I need to worry about it. So like in 40 and 50, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to work hard to get like a good score so that I don't basically come the bottom. For me, my process was if I pass and I can become a safe doctor and I know my communication skills are good and I can relate to people, that's the type of doctor I want to be, rather than someone who wants to kind of be above a certain someone else, or like, so it was more that mindset of like compete with yourself so you don't get disheartened if things go right or wrong or whatever. And I think I kind of switched it off. So even when it came to 40 and 50, when people around me were like, oh, I need to work really hard to get like first or second decile so I can get into a London placement, or like into Bristol in a specific hospital, or in Scotland or in Edinburgh, you want to get into a prestigious university hospital. Like that was kind of like secondary to me, because I had a life to kind of live with that, and like I had other interests, and like medicine wasn't the be all and end all. I do recognize though, like I could have easily ended up on the other side of the country. So for me, if I ended up in Scotland, it would have been difficult. Like because I live in London, my family's here, my community is here. So if I ran out of London too far ahead, I think it could have been an adventure, but it would have been very inconvenient. So that's something like I always had in mind. Like I don't want to come to the bottom of my year group, because then that means I have limited options when it comes to deaneries and I won't get where I want to go. So I do know people that ended up like in areas that they didn't want to be in, and like I'll be honest with you, it was much less to do with them doing not so good in 40 and 50. It was more that the SJT was just random for them and it just didn't help them out. So like at the end of the day, the SJT is a random name generator. It's one exam that you revise like for like 3 weeks that you can't really revise for and practice for. Like there's only so much you can do to influence where you end up. More so, I'd recommend focusing on what would make you become a good doctor. And I'm sure that's something that you're looking into and you'll do. So that's just something to bear in mind. Cool. I think that's that when it comes to final year. So good. I think we've spoken up about a few things today. We've spoken about like a few things about the BMAT, a few things about taking gap years, some really good resources on Jess's Instagram page, then website. I think another medic in a gap year. So that's been something out there as well. Talked about a few books that we'd recommend, and then also a few things that we'd recommend, like or just kind of running through what my life was as a final year med student and the random deadlines we've had, and like what to think about to apply to when you end up having to apply for F1 at the end of your med school career. So that's something for you to think about. Good. Hopefully that's given you guys some perspective. Thank you for listening to my insights. Well, thank you so much, another aspiring medic. I really appreciate that. Hello, Saul. Thanks for joining us. Do feel free to rewatch this if you guys have joined at any moment that that kind of didn't work out. We'll be back here next week at 6 p.m. Medmentor on our weekly Medmentor clinic. We also have our website and our social media posts for insights to help you guys get into med school and kind of help you guys on that med school journey as well, like another aspiring medic and Roshan are on. Another aspiring medic, congrats on your offer. Super, super happy to hear it. It's made my day. And woo, you guys are going to be doctors. Amazing stuff. And to finish off, Roshan goes, definitely good to know about these things. Like you say, can only compete with yourself. Thank you so much for it. You're very welcome. You guys enjoy your week. It's been an absolute pleasure as per usual. And take care. All right. See you soon. Bye. See you guys.